Hello Yanide and welcome back to another lesson of the Living World topic. So your title for today is Coral Reefs and the lesson objectives for today are to recap the Living World topic so far and think about where coral reefs fit into what we've already looked at. Second objective is where can coral reefs be found and why are they found in these locations? And finally, how are coral reefs formed? There's three main ways in which they can be formed. So going back to our biome map of the world, so far we have looked at temperate broadleaf forests or deciduous forests, so the area in pale green. We've looked at hot deserts, the area in pale yellow. We've looked at the Mediterranean biome, also called chaparral, the area in red. And today we are going to look at coral reefs, which aren't a biome in themselves, but they are a large ecosystem within the ocean biome. So quite a large and important ecosystem. Where can coral reefs be found? We can describe the distribution of coral reefs as being within the area of 30 degrees north and south of the equator. When we spoke about hot deserts and we spoke about the fact that hot deserts are located 30 degrees north and south of the equator, we're now looking at the area within that space, so closer to the equator, a band within 30 degrees north and south. Which countries and continents does this include? So this includes the east coast of Brazil, the Caribbean, the east coast of Africa, and the Red Sea, so the area in between Northeast Africa and Saudi Arabia, certain areas within the Indian Ocean and southern India, and off the coast of Southeast Asia and northern Oceania. Okay, you now need to add some additional geographical terms to your Living World glossary. The terms you need to add are coral reef, coral and algae. So pause the video here and press play for the answers once you've done that. You should be able to do it without looking at the answers. So what exactly is a coral reef? So coral is an animal related to jellyfish. They evolved about 25 million years ago. Corals are polyps that live together in reefs or colonies. So these polyps are tiny, less than a centimetre wide, and they emit something called calcium carbonate, which is essentially limestone, in order to build up a mineral skeleton. We don't really see the polyps, we just see the skeleton that they have produced around them. So this skeleton is generally covered in algae, and it's the algae that give the coral the various different colours that we see on the coral reef. These algae photosynthesize and they provide the coral with oxygen and food, and in turn the coral structure provides the algae with support and safety within the coral reef ecosystem, somewhere to live. So some of the oldest coral reefs have been estimated to be up to around 4,000 years old. So very, very large and complex structures that have been around an incredibly long time. And it's for reasons such as this that they are important to us in many ways. So some of the ways we'll be looking at next lesson. Okay, there's a video that you need to watch which has been included on Satchel 1 as a separate link. I want you to watch it only up to 2 minutes 20. It talks about the symbiotic relationship between corals and algae. When you've watched it, or whilst you're watching it, can you summarise the information into 3 bullet points? So pause this video here, open up the other video, complete the task, and then press play again on here. Coral reefs are known as the rainforests of the sea, and this is due to the high levels of biodiversity within these ecosystems. particularly high levels of fauna or animals, so fish and sea creatures living here. The highest area of biodiversity is the Coral Triangle in Southeast Asia and North Oceania. Coral reefs as a whole contain about 25% of all marine fauna, which is incredibly high related to the percent of the ocean biome that they cover. They provide shelter for the animals living here. The fish and some of the plants and animals living in the area are often brightly coloured, and this is due to the need for species recognition. They use the colour to help identify the different species, and also camouflage as well. So many fish are often they're shaped quite thin, almost flat and really brightly coloured, and that's to help them hide within the coral reef and camouflage themselves against predators. Corals need specific conditions in order to grow. Some of these conditions we've already spoken about, but they don't like water that is below 18 degrees C. The polyps, or the animals living within the coral skeletons, prefer water that is between 23 and 29 degrees C. So they actually prefer it to be hotter than 18 degrees C, but just not lower than that. They can manage temperatures up to about 40 degrees C, but at the moment the oceans are warming due to climate change and global warming, and this is having an adverse effect on coral reefs in many places. So up to 40 degrees C for short periods. Ideally, it needs to be between 23 and 29 degrees C. Very salty water, 32 to 42 parts per thousand. They need the sea to be clear, so they want the water to be shallow in order for the algae to be able to photosynthesize. So shallow water means the sunlight can infiltrate, the algae can photosynthesize. Coral reefs are often located on something called a continental shelf. So this is an area of land that just continues underneath the sea before the deep ocean begins. So much shallower water close to the land, which is why they form close to land. They like the water to not be muddy or turbid, as this can smother the reef. Even just small amounts of dust that land in the water in the vicinity of coral reefs can have adverse effects sometimes. Generally confined to tropical or semi-tropical waters. As we've spoken about before, between 30 degrees north and south. And most corals are located near the shore. So there's three main different types of reefs. So we have something called fringing reefs. So the areas or the fringing reefs on this map are located with green dots. So fringing reefs form just at the side of land, just in the shallow water just off the coast. Barrier reefs were formerly fringing reefs, but the sea level has risen over hundreds or thousands of years, and those reefs are now a little bit deeper, so such as the Great Barrier Reef off the northeast coast of Australia is called a barrier reef simply because the water's a little bit deeper now. Atolls. So atolls form around volcanoes. So the reason we've got lots of yellow dots in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, well, the Pacific Ocean is actually at the back of this map if we put the map around to make a globe. So due to the destructive plate boundary forming all around the Pacific Ocean and the presence of hotspots as well, which can result in volcanoes appearing in the middle of the sea, and we get coral reefs around those. If you have a look at the key at the bottom, there's something called other, and what that relates to is something just called patch reefs, so just slightly smaller areas of reefs. So you'll notice that there's some patch reefs just off the west coast of Africa and off the east coast of Brazil as well. So they're smaller, they're not usually where we find the main coral reef ecosystems. So a little bit more information about how the different types of reefs form. So if you have a look at the diagram at the top, fringing reefs, barrier reefs and atolls. In this example, the fringing reef example here is a reef around an island. However, they can also form just at the side of countries or the side of land, the side of continents. It doesn't have to be around an island. That's just the example here. But the main principle in this diagram is the fact that the fringing reef forms next to land. It forms in the shallow sea, right next to the land. As the sea rises over time, natural sea level rise, a barrier reef is created. So exactly the same as a fringing reef. A barrier reef starts off as a fringing reef, but it's just the sea level that changes. And then an atoll. In this situation, we've got an atoll because the island or the volcano in the middle has subsided and it's left a ring of coral. So a ring of coral, due to subsidence of something in the middle, is called an atoll. Obviously, we'd only get that in the case of what's usually in the case of a volcano in the middle of the sea. So your task is to create a recipe for a coral reef. The things that you need to include are the conditions that corals need to grow. There's some information on Satchel 1 to help with that. And the 3 different types of reef. So we want you to be creative and set your work out however you like. You might find it useful to write the first section out as a list, so a list of the conditions that are required for a coral reef ecosystem to grow. But you also need to consider these things. Does the recipe need to be exact? So in terms of temperature, for example, does the water need to be a certain temperature all the time, or can it be slightly different sometimes? And also, what differences are needed in the recipe in order to create each type of reef? So for the reefs to grow, the conditions need to be the same for each type of reef. However, the physical characteristics of the area can be different, so you need to include that information as well. The stretch activity is to complete extension 1 and either write your answer out underneath your recipe or include it in your recipe. Extension 1 is detailed after this, and it's also on Satchel 1. You might find it useful to get some scrap paper and plan your recipe out before you start. So extension task 1, this is on the information sheets on Satchel 1. Watch the video in the link below and make notes about flora and fauna found in coral reefs. You can add these notes in your book underneath your recipe, or you could incorporate them into the recipe. And extension task 2. Use these links here, which are also in the information sheets on Satchel 1, to further investigate the larger fauna or the larger animals that are found within coral reef ecosystems. Can you put the information into a food chain or a food web? And just think about the question, what would happen in your food chain or web if there was an underwater landslide caused by close by to a coral reef? So something happening, maybe just a landslide along the continental shelf that's creating an influx of sediment into the coral reef. What would happen as a result of that in your food chain or food web? So we do not need you to submit your work today. However, if you feel like you've done a really fantastic job, please submit it to your teacher, because we would love for it to go on display in September when we're all back. So the next lesson, we will investigate the ways in which coral reefs are important. Why are they important to us? What do we use them for? What benefits do they bring to us? And also, why are they under threat? So I'll see you all next lesson.